The rain stopped just minutes before the funeral, as if the sky itself needed time to catch its breath. A cold silver mist drifted between the headstones, clinging to black coats and umbrellas as mourners gathered around the open grave. At the center stood the casket of Helena Whitford, the only daughter of billionaire industrialist Charles Whitford. She was young, kind, and gone far too suddenly. The official story was simple and cruel. Helena had died quietly in her sleep. No warning, no second chance. People whispered prayers, condolences, and disbelief. Cameras were absent, but the weight of money and influence hung heavy in the air. This was not just a funeral, it was the end of a legacy, the burial of a future everyone thought they understood. The priest lifted his hand to give the final blessing. The ropes tightened. The casket began to lower. Then a voice cut through the hush. "Stop, please, stop." A man stumbled forward from the back of the crowd. His neon-green garbage collector's uniform was soaked and stained, his boots sinking into the mud with every step. His hands shook uncontrollably, and rainwater dripped from his sleeves. People recoiled instinctively, offended by his presence in such a sacred, expensive moment. He pointed at the casket, his voice cracking but loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's not dead." Gasps rippled through the crowd. A few people laughed nervously, assuming this was some cruel interruption, a madman seeking attention. Security shifted uneasily. Helena's father turned, his face dark with disbelief and anger. The man's name was Mateo Reyes. Most people in that cemetery had walked past him hundreds of times without ever learning it. He cleaned the streets before dawn, emptied trash bins no one wanted to touch, and faded into the background of a city that barely acknowledged his existence. But in that moment, he stood shaking, not from fear of the crowd, but from fear of being too late. "I know how this looks," Mateo said, his voice trembling. "But please, if there's even a chance I'm right, you have to listen." Charles Whitford stared at him as if he were an insult made flesh. "Who let him in here?" someone whispered. Another voice muttered that grief made people desperate. But Mateo didn't back down. His eyes stayed fixed on the casket. He wasn't imagining this. He knew Helena. For years, Mateo cleaned the same streets where Helena walked her dog in the mornings. While others avoided eye contact or crossed the road, she always smiled at him. She asked his name. She remembered it. Sometimes she stopped to ask how his day was going, as if his answer actually mattered. Once, when teenagers mocked him for his job, she stepped between them without hesitation and told them dignity had nothing to do with wealth. She was the only person who ever made him feel visible. Mateo took a shaky breath and began to speak, louder now, fueled by memory. He told them about the night he found Helena slumped on a park bench, pale and unresponsive. How most people would have assumed she was drunk or sleeping and walked away, but he didn't. He checked her breathing. It was faint. Terrifyingly faint. He called an ambulance and stayed with her, holding her hand as her pulse fluttered like it might disappear at any second. He remembered begging the paramedics to check again because something felt wrong. One of them mentioned a rare condition, something about metabolic comas that mimicked death, with signs of life so weak they were easy to miss. But after that night, Mateo was pushed aside. Doctors spoke to family. Decisions were made quickly. When Helena was declared dead, he was told, politely but firmly, that he must be mistaken. What could a garbage collector possibly know that professionals didn't? Yet he never forgot how her fingers twitched around his that night. Like she was trying to hold on. Standing now at the edge of her grave, Mateo's voice broke as he begged them to reconsider. He spoke of her kindness. Of the meals she secretly left near dumpsters for stray animals. Of how she treated people like him as equals, not inconveniences. "I owe her everything," he said, tears streaming down his face. "Including the courage to stand here and interrupt this funeral." The silence that followed was suffocating. Not angry. Not mocking. Uncertain. The priest glanced at Charles Whitford, unsure. A few relatives protested, horrified by the idea of reopening the casket. But Charles, shaken by the raw conviction in Mateo's voice, raised his hand. "Open it," he said quietly. The lid lifted slowly. Helena lay there, peaceful, her auburn hair resting softly against the satin. Her mother covered her mouth, bracing for another wave of grief. Mateo stepped closer, his heart pounding. "Please," he whispered. "A mirror. Just try." Someone handed one forward. It was placed gently beneath Helena's nose. Seconds passed. Long, unbearable seconds. Then, so faint it could have been dismissed as imagination, a tiny cloud of fog appeared on the glass. Everything exploded into chaos. Doctors and the crowd rushed forward. A pulse was checked. Almost non-existent, but there. Shouts filled the air. Someone screamed. Helena was lifted from the casket as if the grave itself had rejected her. An ambulance arrived in a blur of sirens and panic. Mateo stood frozen as she was rushed away, rain mixing with tears on his face. For the first time that day, hope outweighed fear. Hours later, in a stark hospital corridor, Charles Whitford found him sitting alone on a metal bench, still in his soaked uniform. The billionaire sat beside him, not above him, and cried openly. Helena had been in a rare metabolic coma. Minutes from being buried alive. "You saved my daughter," Charles said, his voice breaking. "You saw what no one else did." Days passed before Helena opened her eyes. When she learned the truth, she reached for Mateo's hands and held them tightly, promising he would never be invisible again. Her survival spread through the city like wildfire. Not just a miracle, but a lesson. In the weeks that followed, Mateo was offered opportunities he never imagined. He refused anything that felt like charity. Instead, he accepted a role helping build community programs Helena dreamed of. Programs that fed the hungry, trained the forgotten, and reminded the world that heroes don't always wear suits. Sometimes, they wear torn gloves and have the courage to speak when no one wants to listen. If this story touched you, like, share, comment, and subscribe to channel. And tell us, what part of this story stayed with you the most?